Good morning to all. I warmly welcome you to the 7th Young Indian Scholars Conference on Tibetan Studies 2025. My name is Dolma, and it's my privilege to serve as the Master of Ceremony for this conference.
It is truly an honor to see so many bright and dedicated scholars gathered here today. Before we begin with the formal ceremony, I would like to request our chief guest, Honorable Sikyong of the Central Tibetan Administration, Mr. Penpa Tsering, to kindly light the butter lamp, the lamp that symbolizes the dispelling of darkness and ushering in the wisdom, knowledge, and harmony for the success of our conference. Please, sir. Thank you, sir. So this year, we have received more than 50 applications from across the country, and after a careful and competitive selection process, 23 participants were chosen to present their research. Each one brings a unique perspectives and valuable insights, and together, I'm confident that we will create a vibrant space for meaningful dialogue and exchange. The Young Indian Scholars Conference has always aimed to provide a platform for emerging voices, to nurture original ideas, and to strengthen academic networks. I am glad that each passing year, it continues to grow in strength and relevance. I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank our esteemed experts and guests for joining us and supporting this initiative. Your presence adds a great value and encouragement to the young scholars here. With that, I once again welcome you all and look forward to 2 days of engaging discussion, learning, and collaborations. Without taking much of your time, I would now like to invite Mr. Tempa Gyaltsen Zamlha, the Deputy Director of Tibet Policy Institute, to address the gathering and share a few words with us.
Thank you very much, Jawaharlal, Conference Coordinator. Good morning, Delhi, to everyone. On behalf of the Tibet Policy Institute, we are excited and honored to extend a very warm welcome to our chief guest, the Honorable Sikyong, the President of Central Tibet Administration, and our keynote speaker, Professor Srikanth Kondapalli ji, and also Commander Vasan ji, and to all the scholars coming from across India, gathered here today for the 7th Young Indian Scholars Conference on Tibetan Studies, and a new academic initiative of the Tibet Policy Institute. Over the next 2 days, we are privileged to host around 30 young and senior Indian scholars who will present 23 research papers by 26 Indian young scholars, and also 4 experts talks by prominent senior Indian scholars in 10 different panels, covering a wide range of topics related to Tibet's history, culture, environment, geopolitics, society, and of course, Indo-Tibet relations. This conference has, as many of you clearly know that, has emerged as one of the most important forum for young Indian scholars on Tibetan studies to present their papers and engage in rigorous discussions, providing a space for emerging Indian scholars to share their insights, engage in critical discussions, and contribute to the growing field of Tibetan studies in India. We are deeply honored by the presence of our chief guest, Honorable Sikyong, despite a very, very busy schedule and his immense interest in such academic discussions. We are equally grateful to Professor Srikanth Kondapalli ji, our respected scholar of China Studies, for your presence here as the keynote speaker. We are also thankful to the senior experts present here, and I would also like to acknowledge the sincere efforts by our conference coordinator, Dr. Tsering Dolma, for her many months of work in bringing this conference. And of course, I would like to thank my colleagues at the Tibet Policy Institute for their teamwork in bringing this academic discussion together. Once again, I welcome all our participants and guests. We look forward to 2 days of fruitful discussion, learning, exchange that will further strengthen the academic bridge between Indian and Tibetan scholars and also shape the narrative of future discussion in the coming years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your kind and inspiring words. Your continued support and encouragement means a great deal to us and add immense value to this conference. Next, it's my great honor to invite our chief guest, Honorable Sikyong of the Central Tibetan Administration, Mr. Penpa Tsering, to address the gathering.
Normally, we start the conference with the inaugural session, and then you have the sessions. But today, this morning, you had to change the program a little bit. Because there was this offering of long life prayer offerings to His Holiness by the Tibetan communities from Europe, from Australia, and the Tibetan Youth Congress. And I had to attend that program. It's a very auspicious occasion always for us to be present at any of these offerings of long life prayers to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So I'm sorry for you to having to change the structure of the program a little bit. I want to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to be with all of you. Last year, was it last year? Last year I had the occasion to meet some of you, but this time Professor Kondapalli is here. I've known Professor Kondapalli for the last more than 2 decades, even though he looks a little older than me. So now he's one among the experts, not among the young Indian scholars. So along with Commodore Watson, Dr. Chawla is not that old. She's, I think, still younger than me. So it's really, I consider it a very important interaction to be sitting with you and to be able to share some of my thoughts also. But then yesterday and day before yesterday, I was thinking of saying some things, but then I realized I came about 40 minutes early this morning when your session had already started. So I looked at all the profile of the presenters, and all are professors, associate professors, and you all have presentations on Tibet. So I thought I'm already, if I repeat myself, then I'll be speaking to the priest already. So maybe I will restrict myself to what we are doing today, because that's more practical. So, after we came into exile in 1959, till about 1973-74, that is what His Holiness says, we have been fighting for Tibetan independence, not autonomy. Because from Tibetan perspective, we have always been an independent state, never occupied by any country or never directly administered by any neighboring country, including China. So That is why we followed seeking complete independence from China from 1959 till about 1973-74, when His Holiness first started thinking about negotiated settlement with the Chinese. Because when we talk about 1973, you will realize that this was at the peak of cultural revolution inside Tibet, 66 to 76, when everything was being destroyed by the Red Army, including about 6,000 Tibetan monasteries and 1.2 million Tibetans having died as a direct or indirect result of Chinese occupation. Then from 1973 onwards, His Holiness started thinking about a negotiated solution, what is today termed as the middle way policy, derived from a Buddhist concept. And that was manifested in the 5-point peace proposal of His Holiness to the US Congress way back in 1987. At that time, we had few friends in the US Congress, including both the Senate and the House, must be about just 10 members, including now the Speaker Emerita, Nancy Pelosi, who was a new member at that time, way back in 1987. And His Holiness proposed the 5-point peace proposal, and then His Holiness expanded on the 5th point on negotiation at the Strasbourg proposal in 1988, when he spoke to the European Parliament, expanding on the 5th point of the 5-point peace proposal. And the response from the Chinese government was not as we expected. So His Holiness in 1992 at Yale University said that the conditions that I had set, now I'm not bound by those conditions. And then, since then, His Holiness started speaking directly to the Tibetan people. And particularly in 1994, March 10th statement, His Holiness mentioned that I will refer to the Tibetan public as to what future course of action we should be taking. And then we followed a process of, we wanted to conduct a referendum, but before conducting the referendum, we had a process of public opinion, out of which about 65.4% of the Tibetan public said that whatever His Holiness decides based on the global political situation, changes in China and in Tibet, we will abide by that. And because of the large majority of the Tibetans who expressed those opinions, we didn't have to go through a process of referendum. And based on that outcome, the Tibetan Parliament in exile unanimously passed a resolution very much in line with what the public had decided, that based on the international situation in China and in Tibet, whatever His Holiness decides, we will abide by that. And after that, His Holiness said that we will continue with the middle way policy. And that is where we are still today, here on the same position. And if we need to change this program, if we need to change this policy, then I cannot change it just because I am the elected political leader today, or the parliament cannot change it. We will have to go through a process of referendum in a very transparent way if there need to be changes in policies in future. Now, based on this policy, we have been pursuing, you know about the engagements that happened between 2002 to 2010 between the Central Tibetan administration and the Chinese government, which of course did not yield the kind of result that we expected. Of course, China was using that to make sure that there were no protests against the coming out party of China, which is hosting the Olympics. Once the Olympics was over, then the dialogue also stopped in 2010, and since then there have been no progress whatsoever. And in 2021, May 27th, I came into this office. I had been in the Tibetan Parliament for 20 years, from 1996 to 2016, including as Speaker of the Parliament for 7.5 years, from 2008 to 2016. And when I came into this office, we decided to change our strategy a little bit. When His Holiness speaks about middle way, then of course we are talking about polarities or ends. Without ends, there cannot be middle. So one political end, of course, there are so many definitions to how many ends are there, and experts like Professor Samdang Rinpoche can talk about 10 different ends or 8 different ends. So, and that for the general public, it's difficult to understand. So I stick to the only 2 political ends. One is the historical status of Tibet as an independent state. And the other is the current situation of occupied Tibet under the repressive Chinese government. So we, of course, when we travel internationally from the CTA side, from the non-governmental organizations who always advocate for the Tibetan cause, including Tibet supporters and parliamentary groups, we reach out, when we reach out to them, then we speak about these major issues. One, the focus, of course, what is happening in Tibet, we keep reminding them from time to time, whatever we get to hear on time or late or whatever information we have, all of us give those information to as many governments as possible. But when we speak about middle way, the Tibetan community is also quite conservative, thinking that when we speak about middle way, we cannot speak about the independent status of Tibet. So which I thought is quite narrow-minded in our approach. So we decided to focus on seeking recognition for the historical status of Tibet to gain value for the middle way. Otherwise, there's no value for the middle way. China is not responding to that. And what is important for China is sovereignty. Its sovereignty over, and its sovereignty claim over Tibet. So one message that we wanted to give is to the Chinese government that they cannot distort Tibetan history, whether it's in a person's life or whether it's in a nation's life. History is history. It's past. You, just because of the whims and fancies of some political leaders, you cannot change history. So that message has to be sent clear to the Chinese authorities that Tibet has always been an independent state. And the second is to the international community. The international community keeps repeating the statement that Tibet is part of the People's Republic of China. And when you say that, then I tell them that you're going against international law, because what is happening to Ukraine today, or what happened to Tibet 75 years ago, it was the same international law. There's only one international law. There are no 2 international laws. And Tibet was also forcefully occupied. Under the threat of war, we were forced to sign the 17-point agreement on May 23rd, 1951. And before that, we were militarily, forcefully occupied. Chamdo in October 1950. So that should be null and void under international law. And the second thing we tell the international community is that why do you think Chinese government is asking every other government to say Tibet is part of China? Why is Chinese government not asking other governments to say East Turkestan is part of China, or Mongolia is part of China, or Manchuria is part of China? Why only Tibet? That is because the Chinese government knows that they have no legitimacy of their rule in Tibet, and they are trying to seek that legitimacy from the international community. So even today, if I make a statement from Dharamshala which the Beijing government does not like, and the spokesperson would say, the Tibetan government, the so-called Tibetan government in exile is not recognized by any government in this world. That's how they measure the legitimacy. So we try to impress upon the international community to give recognition for Tibet's historical status. And the third reason is for the Tibetan population, ourselves. Now we are in diaspora. Inside Tibet, you cannot study Tibetan history. You cannot now, under the new colonial-style boarding schools, you cannot study Tibetan language or history or literature and all of that. And the Tibetans here in the diaspora community, in India and Nepal, we are still okay. We run our schools. But Tibetans who have now moved to other countries, they are born and brought up in a totally different environment. And if Tibetans don't study Tibetan history, then who else will study Tibetan history? So if we have to fight for Tibetan independence or Tibetan autonomy, both ways you need to prove the historical status of Tibet. And the fourth reason is also, I keep telling, within the Tibetan community also we have differences of opinion between independent, middle way, this, that. So that causes a lot of divisiveness within the community. And I say this is not necessary right now. That is why we have created platforms like WeTag, Voluntary Tibet Advocacy Groups, where more than 800 young Tibetans have joined this group from different countries around the world. Tibetans for Tibet at the forefront. Tibetans have to be at the forefront of Tibetan struggle. Then you can ask others to join. That is why, of course, we have challenges, we have a lot of opportunities also. The challenges is that the younger generations of Tibetans are moving out from here. And the opportunity is that now these young generations have become citizens in different countries. They speak the language, they understand the system. If they know a little more about what's happening in China and in Tibet and the implications of global political situation on Tibet, then they would be the best advocate for Tibet. So that is the reason why we adopted this change in strategy and worked with the US government for 2 long years, from 22 April to 24 July, to get this Resolve Tibet Act passed. We consider this as one step forward in our advocacy work. And this law talks about certain elements that challenges China's narrative. Because China always says that Tibet is not a problem. There is no Tibet problem. But this law says that Tibet is yet to be a resolved problem. Sino-Tibet dispute. We don't just call it Tibetan issue. It's a Sino-Tibet dispute. I wanted to call it Sino-Tibet conflict, but the US government decided to put dispute instead of conflict. So we got this passed, and the first element says Tibet is yet to be resolved conflict and it needs to be resolved under international law. The second element of the law talks about the Tibetan people's right to self-determination, which is very much in line with the UN General Assembly's resolution on Tibet in 1961. And the third element of this law also talks about the misinformation from Chinese side on Tibetan historical narrative that Tibet has been part of China since ancient times. Sometimes they say time immemorial. The Chinese government, they themselves don't know what time they're talking about. So when it comes to history, of course, they are on very thin ice. And this law says that His Holiness has not accepted this narrative that Tibet has been part of China since ancient times, and this US government also does not recognize this narrative. And other elements of the law also talks about countering China's disinformation on Tibetan history and working with other like-minded countries around the world to adopt similar position. And the last part of that law talks about the territorial space of Tibet, which includes all the 3 provinces, not just Tibet Autonomous Region. So this, we put in a lot of effort to get this law passed in the United States because it's quite a cumbersome process, having to go through the House and then the Senate and then reconciliation, and all that took about 2 years, but we got that through. And we continue to receive good support from the US government, even during the Trump's second presidency. I was there as representative of His Holiness in DC when Trump was there for the first time as president way back in 2017. And right now, we work very closely with the State Department. And I think there are a lot of papers on India's position on the Sino-Tibet conflict. So we are watching every development around this world, what China is doing with AP4, with ASEAN, ASEAN Plus, with SCO, with BRICS, with G20, One space we have is G7, so we still get mentioned in G7 communiques, and I keep reminding the G7 leadership not to forget Tibet. But G20, we don't get mentioned because China is always there, and China has its proxies in all the regions, whether it's South China, whether you're talking about ASEAN. You can't have a unanimity of decision on South China. I'm Professor Kondapalli, and all of you are more expert on these. But there are a lot of developments that we have to keep watching. In ASEAN also, with Laos and Cambodia in China's hand, there can never be a unanimity on Indo-Pacific or China or its activities in the South China Sea. With the SCO, it's most of their people, but now not able to produce too much results as a multilateral forum. Then you have BRICS, you have G20. So all of those platforms, we are watching every single step of the Chinese government. We are also trying to see what changes are happening at the political level, even though it's very opaque. If you watch over a longer period and try to listen more, then you get more news. Of course, Professor Kondapalli and others in Delhi also know more, sometimes more than us, and sometimes we know a little more than them. So, of course, we share our information as well. So that's the steps that we have taken so far. And one thing we are trying to do this year is since we celebrated His Holiness' 90th birthday, for the first time there were 216 journalists in Dharamshala to cover the event. Even though very few governments and leaders made statements, the media all around the world wanted to know what His Holiness had to say. So this 90th birthday, the only one document that's available on His Holiness' reincarnation was a September 2011 document, wherein he states that when he reaches the age of 90, he will make a statement, which he did on July 2nd, because His Holiness has responded to many questions in different ways. When he was asked whether the next Dalai Lama could be a woman, His Holiness says, yes, why not? Because mother have a natural compassion towards their child. And then when His Holiness is asked whether it could be an emanation, His Holiness says, oh, that's also possible, because that practice was there in Tibet. And sometimes His Holiness says, I could be the last Dalai Lama. So there have been various responses from His Holiness' side. And after I became Sikyong, when I visited the United States and I met some people in the National Security Council, and they were telling me, oh, you don't seem to have a process in place. I said, that's your perspective. Some of our friends in India, and we believe that the decision that His Holiness has taken is very, very smart. Because if there is one thing that Chinese government cannot handle, is unpredictability. So if His Holiness decides from now as to what is going to happen to his reincarnation, then China will use all its powers and resources to influence the global opinion on their side. So this time, His Holiness made the statement that the institution of the Ganden Podang Trust of His Holiness the Dalai Lama will continue, and the lineage of the Dalai Lama will continue. Now, how that will happen, whether it will be emanation, reincarnation, of course, if you look at most of the terminology, it points more towards reincarnation, but that's not decided, because reincarnation has to be found only after the death of the Lama, not before that. The Western media thought, of course, we can't blame them, because Christians, Islam, some religions don't believe in life after death. So when we lobby in Europe also, first they tell us, first you explain about reincarnation, make us understand what the whole concept is, then we will see how to support. So that takes a lot of educational work also. I think the 216 journalists who were here in Dharamshala, for them also it was a very good educational experience, having to stay in Dharamshala for almost 1 week to celebrate His Holiness' 90th birthday, because the weather was bad, flights were getting cancelled, so it was not easy to get out of Dharamshala also at that time. So good that they stayed back and they managed to cover the 90th birthday celebration as well as the other aspects of Tibetan diaspora life, including the exiled Central Tibetan Administration's work here. So immediately after His Holiness' statement, that was on the first day of the religious conference that we organized. So this happening after 6-7 years. This religious conference was not picked up so much by the international media, but for us as Tibetans, it's very important process of decision making. So this religious conference supported and approved in total what His Holiness has proposed in terms of his reincarnation. And then the Parliament met here in September. The Parliament also passed a regulation. So all in all, it was a complete circle. And what we have been trying to do is to get evidence and declarations from Tibetan community, because the first community that gets impacted by His Holiness reincarnation is the Tibetan community. So both inside and outside, Tibetans inside don't have the freedom to express themselves. So Tibetans in the diaspora community, almost every organization, every monastic center have issued declarations and statements about what they want His Holiness to do. And based on that, His Holiness issued these statements. So we have collected all those statements. Then we went beyond that to the Tibetan Buddhist world, the Himalayas and the Mongols and the Russian republics of Kalmykia, Tuva, Buryat, and other adherents of Buddhism, of Tibetan Buddhism. They have also passed resolutions in their respective constituencies, and we have collected all of those. And then when we travel internationally, we reached out to Buddhist unions, which represents not just Tibetan Buddhism, but other traditions of Buddhism, including Pali tradition. So there's Italy Buddhist Union, French Buddhist Union, every country have Buddhist unions, so we urged them to, each one of them to issue statements. And then the last is nations. So US is the only one that has a law on Tibet in the form of US Tibet Policy of 2002, which has been amended to Tibet Support and Policy Act of 2020, wherein they have included the element of His Holiness reincarnation, which also talks about sanctioning Chinese officials who will be responsible for choosing or selecting the next Dalai Lama. So based on that, I was in UK and Germany end of June, met with the foreign ministries, and both assured that they will issue policy statements regarding His Holiness reincarnation. And they also mentioned that they are in discussion with France, which they normally do between the three peak powers in Europe on such matters. And later, immediately after His Holiness' official birthday on July 6th, there was a joint statement by 7 nations led by UK, Germany, France, and joined by Holland, who had also passed several resolutions last year after our visit there. And Iceland, normally I have not been able to travel to Iceland, but they always support human rights issues in Tibet. And then Estonia and Lithuania, 7 nations issued a joint statement, not from the foreign ministry, who assured us, but came from the religious ambassadors, religious freedom ambassadors of these 7 nations. And now we'll have to work with the other European countries to see whether the European, because there was for the first time, there was a Czech president, a sitting president of Czech Republic, Petr Pavel, came to Ladakh to have an audience with His Holiness, and we also met him separately and also asked him to issue statements, if not singularly, being afraid of having to counter China, if not singularly, they can do jointly with other European countries. Maybe the Scandinavians can come out together. Even with the Canadians, last week I was in Canada, and I requested Canada also to come out with statement, if not singularly by themselves, at least with 5 eyes, so that they are not targeted singularly by the Chinese government. There could be some joint response. So this is how we try to reach out to the international community to give you some a bird's eye view of what we are trying to do. I travel around 6-7 months a year internationally. I've traveled to more than 27 countries so far. We're trying to reach more countries and more repeatedly. And to the US, every year we have to go at least 2-3 times, because that's also one source of our income from the government side. There was funding cut to everybody, but half of our funding have been restored we worked very hard to get it back in Washington, D.C. At the Hill, at the State Department, at the council level, everywhere. But we got half of it back, and we will pursue. It's not enough to get half of the appropriated budget for this year, but we have to make sure that it's mentioned in the appropriations to come, otherwise you don't get those money. So all these are happening at various levels, and one of the things I've been telling my people also is that now when His Holiness is alive, we receive some respect from the other governments. And now we have to, because we often get asked questions about what will happen when His Holiness is not there, what will happen during the interregnum period before the next reincarnation. His Holiness has been preparing us from 1960 onwards. Under very difficult circumstances, His Holiness introduced democracy. And today we are in a situation where an ordinary person like me can become the Sikyong, the political leader. And now, since 2001 to 2011, His Holiness said, I'm semi-retired. So Professor Samdong Rinpoche almost handled everything on his own from the administrative side. And then that was followed by 10 years of Lobsang Sengge's Sikyongship, and then my first term here now, 5 years. So we already have 25 years of experience running the exiled government. And we seek His Holiness intervention and advice only when necessary, particularly to do with dialogue with China. So otherwise, we manage everything ourselves. So there are a lot of concerns. As long as the Tibetans remain united here in the diaspora community, I'm sure we'll get through every challenges that we'll have to face in the future. And from our side, as we work today, we also prepare for the future, right? Set precedents, set protocols with other governments, meet as many governments as possible, try to increase our visibility. So last year I had a 5-minute meeting with President Macron, and this year we met with the Czech president. So eventually if we get to meet with more ministers, more prime ministers, then our profile also goes up, and in the absence of His Holiness, we will be able to carry through our political responsibility. So I want to end with this high note of hope. We will never lose hope. We will never. So such scholars' conferences are very important, which is the 7th of its kind. And when you have so many young scholars, young professors, then we are creating this network of people, knowledgeable people who can write about Tibet, spread more awareness about Tibet, and get people to know more about Tibet. And I will also make efforts to reach out to as many Indian universities and colleges as possible. And we have a very transparent relation with MAA and other agencies that we have to work with. Of course, I have always said we have to keep two realities in mind. If there has to be a resolution to the Sino-Tibet conflict through the middle way policy, then it can be done only by talking with the Chinese. It will not come from anywhere else. That's a reality we have to face. And the other reality is, till such a time that we are able to reach a negotiated solution with the Chinese, then we have to reach out to the international community. His Holiness also says we have two hands. So we extend both our hands. If the Chinese hold our hand, then we will say bye-bye to the international community. If they don't hold a hand, then we will have to stick with the international community to get support for us. So that we'll keep doing, we'll keep trying. And since COVID, there have been a lot more interest in understanding China, and we understand better than many Europeans and Americans. And I also traveled to South America, and I realized that there is not a single think tank in South America studying China. Nobody to recommend policies to the government. And when I was in Mexico last, the former foreign minister was openly called as the China boy. His nickname was China boy because he was used by the Chinese government and there are a lot of studies also being done. Just last week I was in Canada, as I mentioned before, and Dr. Charles Barton, who had studied in Fudan University, one of the biggest critics in Canada on China, he's also coming out with a book called The Beaver and the Dragon this month. So beaver being the Canadian national animal, and the dragon. So I will end with this anecdote. When I go to Europe and others, I speak about all these things, and then I ask them, what is the takeaway from my talks? And they say, oh, we don't want to be donkeys. Because I tell them, if you kowtow to the Chinese too much, right now you are on your 2 legs, then your hands will also become legs, and China will keep riding you, and you will become the donkey. So our parliamentary friends say, oh, we don't want to be donkeys. And then the other thing they say is, oh, the dragon is biting at us. Then I tell them, at one time, dragon was very weak. China was very weak at one time. Who made the dragon so strong to be able to bite at you? It is United States, it's Europe, it's Taiwan, it's Japan, all the countries that surround. So they made China for what China is today. Now, knowing that the dragon is biting at you, if you still keep feeding the dragon, then whose fault is it? I keep saying that. I think India will also learn its lessons. Despite the boundary issues and all that, business is going up, not in India's favor. The balance of trade is all in China's favor. There are very few countries that have trade surplus with China, including Australia. And when I was in Australia in July, the next day, Prime Minister Albanese was going to China for a 6-day visit tour. And I told the Australians, you don't need clairvoyance. We can tell by reason that in the next 10 months to 1 year, the trade surplus that you have with China will be washed off, because China is going to force you to buy more. All the Southeast Asian countries are buying more. Over the last 2-3 months, it has increased by more than 20%. When I was in Germany, they were clearly saying, media is talking about China using charm offensive in Europe. And Germans say it's not charm offensive, it's coercive economics. So in May and June alone, Germany saw 20% increase of imports from China, because Germany is too dependent on China for rare earth. Some of their factories got closed because of shortage of rare earth, and because of the supply chain problems, China is forcing you to buy more. You have no choice. It's not charm offensive, it's definitely coercive economics. So all these realities of what China is doing in Africa, in Latin America, all around the world, creating dead economies, all those things, I think, need to be made known more to the global community, understand China's motivations behind all their actions. When I was in Mexico, I went to Guadalajara, first time, and some 200 Mexicans came to receive me because of our friendship with a member of parliament from that local area. But the Chinese embassy said, if the president of Guadalajara meets with Penpa Tsering, we are going to cancel the metro project. So sometimes we feel we are quite powerful to be able to stop something, but we have nothing to offer to the world except mental peace and the message of Buddha, which comes from India. So we have to use all our means to the second reality. We said no country is going to leave their interests, national interests, for the interests of Tibet. Nobody will do that. So understanding those, the mantra is how do we align our national interests with that country's national interests, and then see how we can go together. And that's what we have been trying to do, not just talk about politics, but also economics, military, security, all kinds of issues that concerns that country. And that works, that kind of worked over the last 4 years in our advocacy work, reaching out to the global community, and also convincing the Tibetan community to come together as one, not to be divisive. In the next election, I have no plan to campaign. And if I win the election, then maybe I'll write a book, How to Win Elections Without Campaigning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your thoughtful and encouraging words. Your guidance and vision continue to inspire us, and we are deeply grateful for your presence at this conference. Lastly, but certainly not the least, it is my privilege to invite Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, an eminent expert from the Center for East Asian Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University to deliver the keynote address.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to be with you. I want to thank the Tibet Policy Institute, Tempa, Tsering, but also to Honorable Sikyong for his speech today and for the continuing inspiration. It's indeed a privilege and an honor to address this gathering. And want to thank the organizer, TPI. And I see that 23 papers are going to be presented today and tomorrow. And this would mean a lot of traction in intellectual efforts. So this conference is about Tibetan studies. And many of us here are Indians and of course Tibetans. In this room, and I was groomed in the China Studies program in India. I also studied in China in the People's University and in Beijing Language and Culture University. So my view is more skewed in nature in the sense of being viewed from Chinese Studies program rather than from Tibetan Studies program. So that is one limitation that I have in addressing this. But I wanted to again congratulate the TPI for organizing 6 previous young Indian scholars on Tibetan studies, and I think that is very useful in institutional memory for as a repository of information and views regarding the Tibetan studies program in India. I think that is a very rigorous effort. It is not easy to organize these all India conferences on Tibetan studies, gathering people from all across. And so I think there is a major effort that has been made. I first visited TPI when it was born in 2012. This was in March 17th. At the time, it was a very small institution in terms of the kind of research work. And now this is my chance again and an honor again to come back to the TPI. But one of the memories that I have at that point of time was the German scanners which were scanning the so you have taken me to the CTA and to the place where the scanners were scanning a lot of data related to religious rituals and a lot of information about Tibet history, culture, religion. I'm sure the data has already been collected and it's quite useful in terms of our knowledge systems. So let me say that there are 3 disruptions that are happening right now. The first one is AI, artificial intelligence. And partly it was lampooned in the first session, but I would argue that this is TPI should adopt the AI processes increasingly because of the kind of data that you have already collected through these scanners and through various methods, including the 6 young Indian scholars conferences. It's very important because we also can generate a lot of policy output in relation to the AI systems. While there is some speculation that AI is going to bust, but a lot of industries have now been allocating trillions of dollars. Alibaba, for instance, is going to allocate about $57 billion just for the AI related matters. And you saw how DeepSeek, Manus, Kiwi, and these AI machines in China are gathering a lot of information from across the world. And TikTok is now made an American effort. So I think there is a lot that can be done with the AI in predicting policy-related matters. This is very important. So this is my first suggestion to the TPI to look at the AI, which is bringing in a lot of disruptions. The second disruption is, of course, what United States has been carrying on with the tariffs, and this has really generated a lot of buzz. We also see that the United States administration has been compromising with China on various counts. We saw on TikTok, we saw also on Taiwan, the phone calls between President Xi Jinping and President Trump in June and in September that included elements related to Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific. So with that, we see that there is also China emphasizing more on Sinicization of Tibetan Buddhism. With the kind of support that China is gathering through the trade processes, tariff-related issues, and as the Honorable Sikyong just mentioned about, Western countries and everybody else feeding the dragon with investments, trade, tourism, and other concessions. What we have seen is that China is doing a lot of domestic balancing, and this began not only in 1950 during the 17-point declaration, but also during the recent times, for example, on August 29, 2020, when President Xi Jinping addressed the Tibet Forum meeting, where this decision to Sinicize Tibetan Buddhism has been taken. So there is substantial altering of the text, Tibetan text, to conform to the Han Chinese religious ethos, and hence we see a lot of developments like colonial boarding schools, ghettoization of the Tibetans in settlements in recent times, or mineral exploitation, and this is also important because China had used the rare earth metals, etc., as a bargaining chip with the Trump administration in arriving at those concessions that we saw recently. So the second disruption is TPI needs to also be aware of the larger developments that are happening across the world, and with US-China as one of the bases for that transition. So what Honorable Sikyong mentioned, that there is the need for approaching international community, including the American audience, in regard to the Tibet-related matters. A third disruption, and that is central to my presentation today, is what is happening in the Tibetan studies itself. And with my limited knowledge in Tibetan studies, let me mention that this disruption is happening in new methodologies, research methodologies and approaches. My focus has been on China, so let me begin with the Chinese scholars' focus on Tibetan studies. This is where I think TPI also need to learn extensively what the Chinese are doing in terms of the Tibetan studies program. We all know that the Tibetan studies in China is governed by the party state objectives. The Communist Party has some perspectives. Communist Party, for instance, had adopted Stalin's definition on ethnic minorities, nationalities as they call, and recently there has been a revival to Stalin's definition on ethnic minorities, including on Tibet. So this Sinicization program since 2020 also gels with the redefinitions on ethnic minorities in China. Previously in 1950s, Li Weihan, a Communist Party leader, sent delegations to the ethnic minority regions, co-opted them, included them in the project related to what they call national minorities. The argument which now fructifies into what President Xi Jinping mentioned as a pomegranate, that Han Chinese and ethnic minorities in China, and there are 55 of them, these are like a pomegranate, very tightly controlled into this overall concept of motherland that they have conceived of. What it means basically is that the revival, which began with one of the famous ethnic scholars in Beijing University, Ma Rong, who has been instrumental in a lot of works on ethnic minorities, and I request you to study his works on migration patterns, on a host of issues related to the ethnic minorities. So Ma Rong began reviving the ideas about ethnic minorities, and here we see that he argued, for instance, the Stalin's definition now needs to be revised with the current realities of China, which is current realities meaning the second largest economy, aspiring to be the largest economy in the world by 2027. And as the 19th Communist Party Congress said, they want to occupy the center stage, meaning thereby they want to, in political science we understand center stage would mean hegemony. So they have aspirations to global hegemony by replacing the United States, and this is what the 19th Party Congress alludes to. What it then means is that Ma Rong differentiates between politicizing and culturalizing the ethnic groups and prefers to implement the latter phenomena, that is culturalizing, assimilation process. The previous debates about integration, national integration, which India also follows in relation to the minorities in different parts of India. But China is now moving more towards the assimilation process, which means integrating all of these ethnic minorities, 55 of them, possibly erasing their identities, etc. So Ma Rong suggested the natural results of politicizing policies are waves of nationalist movements aimed at establishing one nation, one state, and eventually the formation of a new nation state, that is the Chunghua Minchu that the Chinese call, and these need to be readjusted. Given the Soviet disintegration and creation of new republics like Central Asian republics or others, this needs to be looked at from a different perspective, which is culturalizing policies that do not lead to disintegration of multi-ethnic political entities and may, under certain conditions, help promote integration or even assimilation among individual ethnic groups and that belong to the different political entities. So the project of Sinicization, not just in Tibet, but also with Mongols, with Uyghurs, with various other ethnic groups, this process has already begun in the last 5 years. And various measures are being made by the Chinese government in relation to this. So my suggestion to the TPI is to look at this aspect in, I mean, you have already published in several ways in the Tibet Quarterly, in various other publications that you have been making in the recent times. I did see many of these articles, so I could say for sure on this. So this is one project that China is currently undertaking, and this is a very gigantic project on assimilation of the ethnic minorities. So at the forefront of all of this is the major institute, the China Tibetology Research Center at Beijing. And many of the researchers in this institution serve in the United Front Work Department of the CPPCC. They have actually been very, very prominent in suggesting to the assimilation policies. For example, Chu Wei-chun, a very prominent scholar and an advocate of Sinicization, he had been debating for the last 15-20 years, and this has been later adopted in August 2020 about the Sinicization of Tibetan Buddhism. So this China Tibetology Research Center organizes several conferences, and in their brochure they suggested they have invited some 3,000 scholars from abroad and in other places. So it is important that the young Indian scholars conferences like these would be useful as a counter to what China is doing in terms of that Tibetology Research Center at Beijing. It has hundreds of researchers, and this is another aspect that TPI needs to adopt based on its resources, of course. This has some 300 researchers. 267 are listed as senior and junior researchers, meaning thereby that there is a huge pool of human talent that they are building, and TPI needs to take an inspiration from this to groom a number of scholars in the Tibetan Studies program from your perspective. So I think that needs to be, for example, the China Tibetology Research Center at Beijing looks at also Tibetan Buddhism, which is one of the main focal areas of Tibetan studies. But they try to do it from an assimilation perspective, from a Sinicization perspective, not from the point of view of finding religious ideas, religious. As Honorable Sikyong mentioned just now, there cannot be two international laws. Likewise, there cannot be two views regarding the religious texts and so on and so forth. But I wanted to highlight the findings of Chen Tui, Chen Tsung-rung, Li Dacheng, Liu Wei, and most of them are Han Chinese scholars working on Tibetan Buddhism. You do find some Tibetan origin scholars in this Tibetology Research Center, but these are very marginal. I counted several of them, only I could find 2 to 3 Tibetan scholars within this Tibetology Research Center. So that is a major institution within China. The second is the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, which again grooms a lot of Tibetan specialists. And it has branches all over China. For example, there is the Yunnan Academy of Social Sciences, the Sichuan Academy of Social Sciences, the Tibet Academy of Social Sciences within Lhasa, and Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences, Tianjin Academy of Social Sciences. So they have these branches all over the cities and provinces, and they have the ethnology and sociology departments who promote the Tibetan Studies program. So there is the CAS, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, taking the major effort in spreading the Tibetan studies in China. The Institute of Ethnology and Anthropology in CAS, they have nearly 145 out of 170 sanctioned posts. And out of 145 researchers, 87 are listed as senior researchers, meaning they are senior research fellows and so on and so forth. Many of them are integrated into the policy framework. And generally, the Chinese studies emphasize on policy. Unlike the young Indian scholar presentations in Tibetan studies, which is either about theory or about the generalization. Much of the Chinese research is geared towards policy options. For example, a PhD thesis, an MA dissertation would be more from a policy perspective in China rather than some abstract theoretical formation. I'm not suggesting that is useless, but what I was suggesting is the policy focus in all of these research institutions in China. TPI needs to gear up for this in looking at the research in future. CAS also has the Chinese borderland studies, which does a lot of research on not just about sociology, anthropology, but also about actually the borders. And there is a dedicated journal related to the borderland studies. There was a question in the morning that was raised on borders. So this is very important to understand the status within these. So let me summarize these by saying that the party state intellectuals in Tibetan Studies program in China, number one, they look at the party perspectives and generate the policy options in relation to what they call sovereignty, territorial integrity over Tibet, but also on three evils. As you know, since the 90s, they have separatism, extremism, splitism. They call the splitism is the work of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, that he is splitting from mainland. That's the Chinese national kind of argument. So the researchers in China try to unravel these issues. So much of the discussion we had in the morning, for example, the Utsang, Kham, Amdo areas, which were kind of divided in 1965 provincial reorganization. We see that there is a renewed research in China related to these and how China is a historical part of China. So much of this research is towards that argument, that key argument that it is a historical part of China. Not just from Yuan dynasty, but also from Tang dynasty or even before. China released some 20 white papers in order to project this idea. 20 white papers, they all start with the Han dynasty, where Tibet was included in China during the Han dynasty in 200 odd BC. So that is the statist kind of perspective that is visible in the Chinese scholarship on Tibet. So this is important, and when we have these generalizations about Tibet as the roof of the world, a buffer zone that was mentioned in the first session between India and China during the British times, or a western gate that when you look at Tibet's position as a western gate towards India, South Asia, water tower, third pole, all these arguments the Chinese scholars would rephrase by a lot of investments in Tibet. For example, the 14th five-year plan, which is going to be completed this year, is spending $22 billion in Tibet alone, Tibet Autonomous Region alone. And these are all in infrastructure projects, roads, railways, and whatever. But also most important in extracting lithium, which is again useful in the Trump tariff negotiations. So Tibet contributes to the tariff-related dynamics between United States and China quite substantially. And China earns nearly $120 billion out of pumping out of these minerals to the rest of China. So several Chinese scholars, for example, Cheng Limei, who works at the China Tibetology Research Center, she's a major advocate on the Shaokang villages. the well-off society villages, where China had set up nearly 628 of these. But most important, 200 of these are on the path of His Holiness flight during 1959. So nearly 1/3 of these well-off society villages were established. So they were already preparing for the 15th Dalai Lama related scenarios in terms of these build-up of the well-off societies. So Chen Lime argued that the Sikyong villages are a defensive mechanism, and these need to be further increased in numbers. So currently China is proposing 200 more, that is nearly 800 in all, of these well-off society villages across Tibet's borders with rest of South Asia, Southeast Asia. Another scholar, Cho Ming Huai, of the Tibet Academy of Social Sciences in Lhasa, argued that China should construct strategic corridors across Tibet connecting to South Asia, Central Asia, Southeast Asia. We already saw CMEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, but also with connections to Central Asia, the energy pipelines, the roads that China is constructing. So Cho suggests that these are very important to expand the Chinese state's influence across these regions in Asia. So it's not just about the infrastructure projects in Tibet, but it is also about connecting to the rest of the world, and also importantly to the Indian Ocean. That is what this researcher from the Tibet Academy of Social Sciences would suggest. Another researcher, T. Fang Yao of the Yunnan Nationalities University. So China also had set up a lot of nationalities universities, Beijing, Chengdu, Kunming. Most of them are reserved for the ethnic minorities, but also other Han Chinese, especially faculty members are mainly from Han Chinese, Han nationalities. So New Yanchun of Chichihar University argued that they should set up a joint civil-military command structure in Shigatse in order to counter any threats that may see during the 15th Dalai Lama transition period. So there is some preparation regarding to this. I was mentioning T. Fang Yao of the Yunnan Nationalities University. He's the one who suggested to the colonial boarding schools to be established in massive numbers. So that is also accepted as a kind of policy option. So let me summarize. There are several other scholars in terms of time limit. Let me just summarize this. Chinese Tibetan studies in China. One, it is party state centric substantially. Many of these researchers are themselves party members and policy focused. This is one which is a very different compared to the scholarship abroad, including in India, including in Western countries and others. So the key argument is the yellow man has uplifted Tibet from serfdom, from slavery, and the socialist project of the 5-year plans. And by the way, we had a researcher doing PhD in JNU on the 5-year plans in Tibet, Dolma Tsering. She now is in Taiwan. She had a complete thesis on this subject on Tibetan economy. So the project is a socialist project, which means that everything is under the public ownership. But the fact of the matter is, Tibet's GDP today is about $33 billion, while China's GDP is about $19 trillion. China's per capita income is about $13,400. Tibet's per capita income is $900. Tibet is the poorest region in China currently, so this socialist project doesn't really hold water because there is a lot of poverty in Tibet. So the key argument of the Chinese in Tibetology in China, that also is problematic in relation to the socialist project. There is also a lot of traction in the Chinese studies on Tibet in China, which is on the water issues and other related environmental issues. So we see the same argument, socialist project. So the key question that can be raised is how far Tibetans benefited out of this socialist project in Tibet. The balance sheet looks to be very limited in nature. So TPI already had published several articles in this regard in relation to the 5-year plans, etc. But that needs to be studied more carefully. The second level of Tibetan studies, of course, is from the Western scholarship, which is kind of substantial. There is major contributions in methodology, in pushing the boundaries in history, religion, literature, gender, and other disciplines. We have Joseph Tukey, David Snellgrove, Tsering of the British Columbia University. We also have Robert Thurman and various others, Melvin Goldstein, Tony Huber, Elliot Sperling, and others. So there is substantial scholarship here. My suggestion for the TPI is to invite them, make them as resident scholars in TPI for extended periods, and most of them come with their own finance, so it is not a so Western scholarship in Tibetan studies is quite diverse and quite substantial, but sometimes it also suffers from the commercial angle with which most of the Western countries look at Tibet. After Roosevelt considered Tibet as part of China, nationalist China in 1942, much of the American argument, Western argument, doesn't touch about this issue of sovereignty and territorial integrity. They only raise the issue of human rights, religious issues, and so on, but not the structural element, which is crucial in understanding the middle path approach or the poles, as Honorable Sikyong had mentioned. Now let me shift to the Tibetan studies by the Tibetans, and that is quite substantial, even though it is heavily biased on religious issues. And quite apparently this is important because that is where the identities are generated. And so we see Samdung Rinpoche's work, substantial work, Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche, Tudeng Nima, Dilgo Rinpoche, Lobsang Rabke, Lama Chimpa, Lodi Gary's recent memoirs, for example, mention all those. Jamyang Norbu, Thupten Jinpa, Tsering Woser, Karma Choing, or others. It also needs to preserve their work as well as to bring them into TPI fold once in a while. It is important to brush up those memories. So that is one suggestion. My last section is on Indian scholarship on Tibetan studies. And here while one section focused on Tibetan Buddhism, which is very important, connection between India and Tibet, given the scholarship related to Nalanda tradition, Madhyamika philosophy, and the close connection between Sarnath, Lumbini, Lhasa for ages. That connection is very important, but somehow it dominates the whole Indian Tibetan studies. I'm not suggesting this is not important. What I was suggesting is, from my own perspective of focusing on foreign policy, security studies, strategic studies, this is limited in nature. The Indian Tibetan studies generally tend to get influenced by the policy planning, the scholarship that has generated in India, and the relations with China. And we had some previous presentations related to that India-China policy influencing the Tibetan refugees in India. So the connection here is that you have the Sardar Patel's letter to Nehru on mentioning the dangers of Tibet being gobbled up by China and the militarization that has happened since then, and Nehruvian policies of engagement with China. So it was caught up in this, and that has also influenced the scholarship. In universities, specifically JNU, DU, and emerging other universities, this has also had a spillover effect. And much of the China scholarship is pro-China because the engagement policy has been set at the higher levels, at the South Bloc levels. So as a result, frequently there were complaints that the supervisors were not allowing the Tibetan students to conduct their own research on Tibet. And second is the ideological affinity of some of the scholars in the Chinese studies program more close to China. The extreme is China's chairman is our chairman. In 60s we had those slogans, right? So this has also influenced, this ideological slant also influenced the kind of Tibetan studies that could emerge in India. For instance, in many universities, the supervisors will not allow you to conduct your own research you want to do on some aspects of Tibet, both for Tibetan nationalities as well as for Indian or other nationalities. So there is the word used, silencing. It also happens in academia in terms of this research, and many universities are prone for that tendency. But I must say that there is a lot of developments that happened. Dawa Norbu, Claude RP, Stobden, Siddiq Wahidi, Sampadananda Mishra, Brahmachalani, Ramu Manivan from Tamil Nadu, from the University of Madras. So this is an emerging field, but there are structural issues on funding, on ideological slant, on various others. So the Young Indian Scholars Conference is a reminder for us that there are so many other ways to do research and could be inspired in terms of the status of our discipline here. So let me conclude by 3 more suggestions to the TPI. My role model is Satulimai. Many of you may not heard about him. He works for the East-West Center. That's on terrorism, on counter-terrorism. So I met him long ago in Tokyo, some 15 years ago. So he was making a presentation on the Tanzims, the terror organizations in Jammu and Kashmir, Punjab, and other regions. So what they did was they picked up each village, their profile in terms of census, in terms of GDP, in terms of public perceptions, in terms of every other aspect. They collected a lot of data related to each village in Jammu and Kashmir. And with a press of the button, you will come across in this village, the aspirations are rising, violence is rising, and other parameters are showing stress levels. So the collection of data related to this is important for TPI. For example, there are 7 prefectures in Tibet Autonomous Region and more in Amdo and Kham. TPI needs to do a micro-level study, and this is possible, micro-level study related to each village. The reason why I'm suggesting is, if you have 160,000 refugees in India, which is a exaggerated figure, China also releases an information that they have 470,000 Tibetan cadres who are working in the administration. So this is psychological war. That we have more Tibetans working for us than you have in Dharamshala, or in Leh, or in Darjeeling, or in Bailagupe. So you need to do micro studies, going beyond just the cadre level, but focusing on each village in each of these 7 prefectures in TAR alone, but also in Amdo and Kham, and doing a study like what Satulimaya did on the aspirations of Tibetans in Tibet, in Kham, Amdo, and other areas. This is necessary for the future of Tibet itself, and this is important. You need to do that micro study on the health parameters, on population growth, on the China today has these surveillance cameras. They also have a lot of data related to facial recognition, which means are you angry today, are you happy today, is all recognized by this facial recognition. And if you are angry for some purpose, you will be put up in a re-education camp or whatever. So the data is being collected even by these scientific methods. TPI needs to tap those resources if you want to be at the cutting edge of research. Satulimaya model, I mean, I'm just simplifying this, but you need to be at that level. Second is, Dharamshala has a huge pool of refugees coming from Lhasa. Do you know most of them do not know Hindi, English, or any other languages other than Tibetan and Chinese? One of the side effects of colonial boarding schools is they know only Mandarin, only Putonghua, which means that you actually have an asset here of utilizing the energies of these refugees to translate. A pool of translators, substantial. I heard there are 1,700 such Putonghua knowing refugees in the camp here in Dharamshala. This is a very big pool which would solve the TPI's translation problem if you are able to channelize some of these energies. It's very important to understand this, very important to translate, because data again has to be fed into the AI systems. You need a lot of data related to, and they have also a lot of personal experiences in several villages in Tibet on the system that is present in Tibet. So you have a live data. Of course, the number of refugees have come down from 5,000 before to an estimated 236 currently, and probably even this figure is going down. But what is important is to channelize those energies. They don't know any other language other than Chinese and Tibetan. So here is a very, very big asset in terms of utilizing their talents. So you could possibly look at this issue quite substantially. The third suggestion I wanted to suggest to the TPI, apart from continuing the young scholars conferences, you need to recruit professional researchers in extensive. I suggested the example of China Tibetology Research Center in Beijing, some 267 researchers. That makes it so comprehensive in looking at each and every aspect of Tibet, not just religion, but also many pressing issues that are affecting Tibet. So TPI needs to be at that cutting edge of research and also channelize, and since your director is linked to the International Relations Cooperation Directorate, could also channelize in terms of policy options. That's a problem in scholarship in many universities, think tanks, etc. But you need to solve this by adopting the Chinese model, that you need to have a policy option. So you combine both a think tank and a university level, where it's not just stale research, but policy options. That's very important. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your valuable insights and kind suggestions towards Tibet Policy Institute. With that, we now move to the next part of our program. I kindly request everyone to join us for a group photo session outside, followed by lunch at the Potala Hall. And after the break, we will reconvene the panel discussion. I encourage all the participants and audience members to join us with the same enthusiasm as we begin this exciting part of the conference. Thank you very much.